The way that I see it is that the more women are empowered with money, the more resources they have, I think the better our entire society is going to be.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the WWW podcast. My name is Wes Caprill, and this episode features an interview that I had with Carrie Bradley. She is an expert in coaching and mentoring women when it comes to matters of personal finance and coaching them to become more empowered and confident when it comes to money and planning for retirement. I certainly wasn't disappointed by our conversation, and I doubt you will be either. I am very pleased to welcome to the show today, Carrie Bradley. Carrie, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. After I read your bio, I realized you are a perfect fit for the show, given all the work that you do in empowering women when it comes to matters of money. Before I dive into some of the questions that I have, would love it if you took a few moments to tell the audience a bit about yourself and what led you down this journey towards empowering women when it comes to matters of finance.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share my thoughts with you and your audience. I currently am a mindset and strategy coach, and I do a little bit of consulting as well. And I specifically center most of my work around empowering women with money. And part of that is because I went through my own journey of being in a marriage for 14 years and a dynamic financially that wasn't very healthy between us. And so when I went out on my own, I really discovered a lot about how to set myself up, not just for my future retirement, but in my day-to-day to where I'm not just having enough for my daily needs, but actually I pursued pretty intently financial freedom and got to that point last year on my 42nd birthday. So having now traveled that path and figuring out how to sort of win at the game of money, I love being able to impart the wisdom and the insights that I have learned to other women so that they can feel that level of confidence that comes from really knowing what you're doing and having that control in your life.
Absolutely. I think that's some challenges that we experience with some of the clients that we've had is kind of finding that empowerment themselves. In fact, one of the systems that we implemented is called Empower and creating financial plans for women accordingly. To go off of that, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that women are facing today when it comes to finances and money?
Yeah, I would say the most common things that I come across with my clients is a lot of women, they don't typically have the literacy that men do, and largely because they haven't had access to the information up until more recently. And so that means that they tend to feel disempowered, or they feel like it's way more complex than it actually is. So I work a lot with women to teach them, the ins and outs of investing, and, getting creative about even pulling in different income streams to get your needs met, and usually trying to position that too with things that they enjoy as much as possible. So that's something. And then also too, an area that I've spent enormous work on in my life, and then I guide women to as well, is learning to negotiate. Specifically around your salary, or if you're self-employed, earning a rate that is appropriate for the service that you're providing. A lot of women shy away from that, and largely because we haven't been taught. But two, after having done a lot of research around this, women tend to prioritize relationships above all things. And so when they're negotiating, it feels as if they're putting that relationship at risk. And so they tend to avoid it. And so what I do is I help them to kind of construct situations that are going to be win-wins for both parties, if that's your employer and you, and to collaborate versus it needing to be like, I need this or else, so navigating those with a little more grace and tact and ultimately confidence. So I think those are the top areas that I see the most common, is just understanding how money works and how you can make it work for you. And then, being able to show up with confidence around the amount of money that your value is and what you're providing.
And that makes a lot of sense in terms of what I've seen. Women are very empathetic, I would say, especially in comparison to men. And I think too that applies to money, and making things less personal in that respect? Are there any strategies that you would say women could employ to say, okay, let me separate myself from the personal side of this and make it just a business decision? Is that really just a mindset thing that they have to work on?
Yeah, I think and you're talking about when it comes to negotiating or seeing the
Negotiating or
value.
really anything about money. It's not wanting, like you said, to ruin that relationship.
Mm.
So how do you get your head around it's not the relationship? We need to look at this kind of from a business perspective.
Yeah, right, exactly. So one thing that, I think a lot of people would typically do when trying to assess their value that they're bringing to the table is do market research. See what other men and women are charging for the role that you're playing based on the experience that you have in that industry. So using that to get some objective feedback on what you could be charging, and then, so that there's that piece, but then there also is the mindset aspect too of, a lot of people, they have these ways that they kind of block themselves off from earning higher incomes or even just holding on to money. Some people, they spend it the second they have it, or they give it away. A lot of women tend to give it away. So it's really
Hmm.
working on how to hold on to that money and protect it, and then to take that next step and make it work for you instead of you having to work so hard for it. So yeah, and the mindset piece is really quite powerful. I find that it's 80 to 90% of the heavy lifting when it comes to stuff like this. And then obviously a little bit of strategy too, but once we kind of get into the psychology of it, usually that's when women can kind of see outside the box a little bit and can like move forward with more confidence in what they're asking for.
That's a fascinating thing when it comes to money is it's a lot of it's psychology. I mean, being an advisor, we don't really play with the numbers as much as some people might think. A lot of our job is really around coaching people and keeping them on the track that they're on. When market crashes happen, people get a little freaked out, if you will. And it's trying to remind them of what the plan is that we put in place, and we've accounted for this
Yeah.
accordingly.
Right.
What are some strategies that women can employ to build financial security and retire successfully? Are there any strategies that you specifically implement with any of the people you've worked with?
Well, yeah, but it's usually a pretty custom approach, and
Hmm.
I have my clients come to me for all different reasons. A lot of women, they're mostly focused on the income generation piece, like how can I earn a
Mm.
higher income? They tend to struggle with that depending on where they're at. So so then we set up a strategy around how to maybe create a side hustle or an additional income stream into what they have if there's no room to negotiate with what they're currently setting their hands to. Um, so yeah, it's that, or if they're at a point where maybe they're out of debt and they're ready to invest, then we talk about what vehicles are going to make the most sense. Is it the stock market? I have a ton of experience with real estate. So if somebody's curious about pursuing that as an investment option,
Mhm.
I spend a lot of time educating them on the markets and how to be a landlord and that kind of thing. So really it is a custom approach to asking like, well, what's the priority for them? Are they just digging out of debt right now? Well, that's going to be our focus. We're going to see how we can snowball that and really assess too their spending. This is something I talk a lot about, it is what you're spending your money on aligned to your values and priorities. You'd be shocked at how many people have money going out every month to subscriptions that they don't even really care for anymore, or things that, they feel like they should buy, but they don't really want to buy. And
Mhm.
so we even do work around really assessing like what actually matters to you the most. And let's say no to everything else. And just realigning that in their budget, it's amazing how different they feel internally, knowing like, okay, I'm really in control of what's happening here. So there's not really a one size fits all approach.
And I love hearing that. Believe me, that's how we approach things too. I always say cookie cutter approaches can be drastically bad for some people. What works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. And if you apply the same strategy to two different people, one could succeed and the other one could fail
Right.
phenomenally.
Yeah. And honestly, this is why I work one-to-one with people. And that's why I love it so much because you can really get into customizing exactly based on their personality and how they operate and what their priorities are. And when you're doing it in a group setting, it's just you can't get that personalized, focused attention. I'm sure you guys are similar in that way too.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why I like being independent because we don't
Mm,
have to follow a model per se. We do on our own developed model, but it's individualized for each person.
mhm.
Um, Based on something that you said, I got to thinking about risk. And when it comes to building wealth, there is a level of risk that you have to assume to achieve growth in the long term. But, and again, a lot of what I say is based in research, so I'm just trying to say this objectively. Women are more risk averse than men in a lot of the research. How have you addressed that with some of your clients? Have you noticed that being the case where women are more risk averse, and kind of how have you conquered that with them?
Mm. Yeah, I would say that rings true for a lot of the women I've dealt with. And again, it kind of comes back to their priorities. So something I hear a lot from women is, I want stability. I
Mm,
want security. And so we really tease out, well, what does that mean? What's that going to look like? And again, a lot of the times it is around their income and increasing that number. So and two, at the same time, I tend to take the approach of encouraging them to take risks. And this gets into the mindset piece too. There's so many like fears and concerns that people have, and some of them are justified. You obviously don't want to just put all your eggs in one basket. I'm a
sure.
total advocate of diversification.
Being
Um,
in Cincinnati, it's the Procter and Gamble folks, being all in
yeah.
one stock,
I
kind of thing.
know,
Yeah.
right. So definitely I'm a huge advocate of diversifying as much as you can handle and manage,
Hmm.
to mitigate that risk, and that helps them to feel more comfortable moving forward. But yeah, I find that they tend to need that push and that nudge to kind of like step out of their comfort zone a little more. And a
Hmm.
lot of that can come though with the education and the literacy once they start to understand more the ins and outs of how money works, and what's actually going on internally based on what they were taught about money in their family of origin. Once we really get a handle on that, then they start to feel more confident around stepping out and trying a new investment vehicle, or asking for a raise or whatever it is. So yeah, so I think there is a lot of room for growth in that area for women in particular, is like letting yourself kind of go outside the bounds a little bit more so that you can reap the rewards, of your investments.
Absolutely. I think too, it's kind of getting over the idea that you would be losing money, because in our view, you don't lose money until you sell.
Mm,
So if you're invested and it goes down, you haven't actually lost anything. On paper, sure. But if
yeah,
you go from 100,000 to 200 and then it's down to 180, you've still made $80,000. You've
yeah,
not lost that 20, really. So I
right.
think that's a big thing in the mindset. It's just understanding, principle versus growth and all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
This episode of the Wealth Wise Women podcast is brought to you by Money and Clarity. Wall Street likes to make personal finance and investing complicated, but we're here to tell you that it isn't. But saving and investing for your future can bring with it stress, emotions, and uncertainty, as well as many questions like, how much do I need to have saved for retirement? What happens if the market declines? And probably the most important question of all, will I be okay? That's where we come in. Not only can we help simplify the financial planning process, we can also help guide you through all the emotions and uncertainty that come with planning for your future. So, give us a call today at 513-563-7526 or go to visitwithmc.com to schedule a free, no obligation consultation. We'll discuss how we might be able to help you achieve your financial goals and provide you peace of mind knowing that you will be okay.
Well, I was just going to add that, something to a sort of reframe that I offer people is, even when you're like spending money, let's say on an advisor or on a coach, a lot of people, when they're looking at their expenses, they see that as a loss. But I constantly try to remind them, this is an investment in yourself.
Hmm.
And something I have learned in my own personal growth process is every time I invest in myself, I get a great ROI. And so
Absolutely.
to really kind of shift the way that you think about it as like, this isn't something that's going away from my bank account. Yes, it is in a way, but it's actually going to build and expand and grow you in these other ways. And so I think that can kind of help people to kind of get over their fear of investing.
You don't need an advisor or coach these days to buy the products or invest the money. I'll always say that. My value is not in my ability to put you in a certain mutual fund. I mean, everything's so commoditized these days. My value is helping you coach through things and understand, I think, a lot of the bigger picture. So I definitely agree with you on that. And that's something that you just can't get yourself. I mean, you multiply when you bring in partners and you get help. Certainly.
Yeah, gosh, that reminds me of the idea of collaborating.
Yeah.
Like getting rid of the idea that there's competition. It's more of when I collaborate with people, that's where I can really start to increase exponentially, I think, the return on your investment. That's where you're creating value together. And I believe that value always comes back to you. So thinking of it that way, I think too.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's a scarcity mindset versus, I would say, an abundance mindset.
yes,
Yeah, the
absolutely.
pie is always growing. People think that they only get a small chunk of a static pie. No, it's always growing,
Hmm.
and you can't have a scarcity mindset when you're investing. It just won't
Yeah,
lead to success in the long term.
truly. Yeah, I agree completely.
Now, you've talked a lot about education. Obviously, knowledge is power when helping you grow and learn things in the market. On top of working with someone like an advisor or coach, what other resources have you found that have worked for people? Is there anything specifically out there that you'd recommend people check out?
Well, I always supply my clients with different resources to give them a broader perspective or new insights as they're, going through their process. So a lot of self-education. Um, I have specific books that I recommend. There's one if you're a woman that's trying to increase your income, called The Secrets of Six-Figure Women. It's a powerful book, and I myself reaped enormous rewards from that book, and actually reached my first six-figure year shortly after reading it.
Perfect.
So that one I love, and also too, different podcasts I would recommend. If you're into real estate or want to learn more about that, there's something called Bigger Pockets. And then there's also a sector of that called Bigger Pockets Money. And that's more around just kind of learning about finance in general and how to get creative. These are people who are in the FIRE world, which is
Hmm.
financial independence, retire early. And I spend a lot of time speaking to that crowd. And so, they get very creative on how to set your life up in a way to where you're preserving the lifestyle that you want while also speeding up your path to retirement to make it as, in the timeline that you want instead of waiting till you're 65. So anyways, the Bigger Pockets Money podcast I really recommend, and the real estate one as well. So those are some of the ones that come to the top of mind.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned FIRE. I've always thought of them as a very Spartan lifestyle, if you will, but I think it's grown over time to be able to adapt to whatever your lifestyle is. But that was always early on. It was like you got to live a very Spartan lifestyle to
Yeah.
achieve this.
Well, it's funny. I just got back from Florida about a week ago. I gave a talk at one of these events with a guy named Mr. Money Mustache. He's one of the people who started the movement, I want to say about 10 plus years ago.
Okay.
And there is a frugality aspect to it, but it is so much bigger than that. It's really about assessing the lifestyle that you want to have and optimizing all of your dollars in the way that align with your values and your priorities. It's really about efficiency more than anything. And there's so many smart, open, interesting people in that sphere. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think sometimes it can get that like, you have to eat ramen for the rest of your life if you want to retire, which some people do go to that extreme. I don't recommend it, but
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the same way. If that's what you want to do, go ahead. But yeah, you got to enjoy that. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So shifting gears a little bit, there seems to be a bit of a stigma out there that married women tend to concede control of the couple's finances to their husband. And that the husband tends to control all of the financial picture. He knows where everything is and he handles all the investments. Kind of what's your viewpoint on that whole thing? Have you worked with anybody in this situation to kind of help them, take back some of the, I don't want to say control, but have a better idea of the family finances and make it more of an equitable relationship?
Yeah, gosh, I see this a lot. And I do think, times are changing. It's becoming
They
less
are.
and less traditional in that way. But especially in areas like the Midwest that tend to be a little more conservative or traditional, it's
Mhm.
more common for women to have had given all of the control or the management to the man. And so what I advocate for is as much shared equity in all of these processes. So, because what happens is if you don't equally share, at least understanding what's going on and having some say, both people, what happens is you end up in these what I call codependent dynamics where you're relying on that person to the point where you're now dependent on them. And so if something were to happen to them, which this does happen where,
Mhm.
someone's spouse dies or maybe you get divorced, and then all of a sudden you have no idea what to do. And it can be such a scary place. So to really build that, I call security within yourself by educating yourself and taking an active role in the financial component, you're going to feel more empowered just having that knowledge and having that say. And there's going to be less of a likelihood that there's going to be resentment between the two of you. And the power dynamic is going to be on equal playing field.
Mhm.
So I really advocate for as much ownership, the in that process. What is maybe that looks like I'm going to handle the finances or the budget this month, and then you do it next month. Or, but really more than anything, it's a conversation where you both are in it together and checking in together. Are we aligned on where we want our money to go? If not, like, how can we compromise and negotiate? And it is a lot of work, right?
Mhm. Oh
To
yeah.
engage it that way. But there's so many relationships that dissolve because of money. I'm sure you've seen this too.
Oh yeah.
And so much of that can be prevented by
Ugly ones too. They're
yeah,
ugly.
very ugly. And it becomes much a power dynamic and a controlling thing. And so when you have that open dialogue, there's so much more harmony in the relationship, and you're much more likely to achieve your goals together than if one person is just driving the ship. So
In some cases, it is a lot of the husband being controlling in the relationship. In other times, though, at least in our experience, it's sometimes the wife saying, "I just don't really want to deal with any of it."
yeah, yeah.
How would you approach that conversation where it's trying to educate, hey, you don't necessarily need to be too involved in it, but it's good to know all of it? And how do you kind of convey the confidence to
Mhm.
understand it?
Yeah, well, I would probably first paint like, well, what if something were to happen to your spouse
Hmm.
and you are now officially in charge, to kind of like make them confront the potential reality of what their life could look like, to open them up to being more willing to engage it. So to kind of like paint that picture and say, is this something that you want to prepare for by way of learning and educating yourself? And then too, just painting the positives of like, well, if you make the choice to gain this knowledge and to engage with your spouse, then your confidence is going to rise. And this too, I think it requires the husband, let's say, if he's the one that's been in more control, to let go and to be willing to let his spouse come in. And some people have a really hard time letting go of that control. So it does take, again, like a lot of work on both parties, but really taking that level of ownership, everybody's going to win, right? And
Yeah.
so I think kind of highlighting both what you're going to gain and also what you could struggle with if you don't do this sooner than later, incite somebody to take more action. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like if somebody's not interested, you can only lead the horse to water. You can't make them drink. So it's like, those are
That
some of
is true.
the
Yeah.
sort of tips and things that I try to encourage people to. And then too,
But sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, if there's kids involved also, sometimes with women to know, like, you can then empower your children with this information. Like, think about the freedom that you're going to be able to afford them if you take more of an active role in this.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of women are very driven by the well-being of their kids. So to kind of highlight that as another benefit.
Combined with not wanting to be a burden on their children either. That's another
Yeah.
thing we found. So that's kind of a lot of the point that we use is, by achieving the financial independence, you won't have to rely on them down the road. Because I know a lot of women want that independence and they don't want to, be getting money from their children over time.
Yeah, right.
And you made a very good point that actually kind of shifted my own perspective in it too. We talk, I talk a lot about, how can women gain the control in the relationship and understand more of the finances, but I forget, how do we teach the men to give up the control and to learn to share? Because I will admit, we're probably not very good at that.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I think can be hard in so many ways because you are being invited to trust this person. And sometimes you
Yeah.
don't know how they're going to show up with all of that until you give them the opportunity to do so. But the more a man can be supportive and really understand like how this isn't just going to help his wife, but it's going to help their entire relationship, their entire trajectory with their finances, that you're going to create more security both within yourselves and within the connection that you have. So I think remembering like this is going to be the advantage of, letting.
It's a win-win.
Yeah. And I think too, if it gets very difficult, sometimes people don't know how to navigate these conversations. And to really be able to hear the other person and to build that trust, that's where having a third party, like, someone like you or a coach or whatever,
The
to
value of
mediate
third
that
party.
and to help people to come to that common ground can make that process so much more smooth.
We're not licensed therapists, but we often feel like we are.
Yes, right? Oh, there's so much, like you said, psychology that goes into it. That I really think that's the bigger piece is.
If you want to do this line of work, we always say study psychology.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the finances much.
Right.
It's really understanding people.
It's true. So true, 100%.
And personalities can be difficult.
They can.
But that's the way of the world. All right. So on another side of things, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen women make when it comes to money? What are some of those that kind of stand out that you would use as kind of cautionary tales, if there are any?
Yeah. I mean, the thought that's coming up for me really that I see the most is going back to what we were talking about earlier around not taking the risks, right? Not getting in the game, so to speak.
Not letting your money grow. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just kind of staying back in fear of, what if the thing that comes up the most is what if I fail? And I tell people often, like, there is no failure. There's only learning.
Yeah.
And, so obviously you want to educate yourself before making certain decisions around your investments and what might be right for you. And that's where having a professional can be really valuable. But yeah, not taking action, I think, because then you're losing the time horizon that you could be gaining on compounding interest. And so I would say that is the most common thing that I see with women is just being afraid to put themselves out there and to really start getting in the game and making it work for them.
No, that's great. That speaks to what we're doing. So I like hearing that it means we're on the right track in terms of helping women, get in the game.
Yeah.
And help them achieve financial security in their future. So with that, what is your outlook regarding women's wealth and their financial future? Positives, negatives, kind of where do you see it all heading?
I tend to take a very optimistic standpoint.
Good. Me too.
Yeah, I had someone ask me the other day on a podcast interview, like, what's sort of my bigger vision? And the way that I see it is that the more women are empowered with money, the more resources they have, I think the better our entire society is going to be. And this isn't against men, but it's going to balance out the overall power
Oh,
structure.
I completely agree, though. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
And it's amazing. Every woman that I talk to about, well, what do you want to do with your money? I want to help so and so. I want to help my kids. Like they want to do good in the world. And so many of them just don't know how to do it, or they don't have
Yeah.
access to the resources. And they tend to be so much more collaborative. Like, let's come together and let's
Oh, yeah.
how to solve these problems. And so from that sort of global standpoint, I see that more and more women are starting to take ownership of their financial situation. And as they do, they're going to make, I believe, amazing decisions that are going to help the people in our nation. They're going to help the leaders to make decisions that are in the best interests of the citizens versus, just wanting high profits and power, right? So I take a very optimistic view, and I do see it changing, and I do see a lot of men, allowing women to kind of rise up in leadership roles and
Oh, yeah.
take control of the financials. And so on both sides, I will kind of just keep my flag in the ground there and just
That's
keep
great. Yeah.
in a good direction, even though a lot of people are feeling disconcerted about
If
this.
you turn off the news, you'll realize the sky is not falling.
Exactly,
It's
right?
still
You
there.
deserve so much of your energy and your well-being and inner peace when you just kind of put the drama to the side and focus on what you can control in your life.
That's the biggest thing is people think, they're like, I can't control that. Well, yeah, you just let it be.
Exactly.
They say don't put blinders on. I agree. Put blinders on.
Yes.
You'll be a lot happier if you do.
Oh, so true. I couldn't agree with you more. And you need to be somewhat aware, but also how many people I talk to, they turn it on and they're like, oh, I feel terrible now. I'm like, don't do that to yourself. Just,
you cannot have fear if you're investing and if you're trying to build for the future. You have to be optimistic, because what else are we doing it for then?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that's such an amazing growth mindset you have right there, and thinking that way. Like, things are only going to get better. More is coming,
Exactly.
So,
Bad news has always existed. You guys got to find the
Right.
good news, because it's always
That's
there.
right. That's right.
So how can people find you?
Yeah. So if any people want to check out my work and how I tend to support my clients, you can go to my website, which is carriebradley.com. I'm also pretty active on Instagram. Every day I'm posting content to encourage people, give them tips and strategies and ideas on how they can move the needle forward on their path to financial freedom. So that's at Carrie Bradley Coaching is my handle on Instagram. And then I mentioned to you before we got on here, I recently launched a book.
Yes, please tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's called Dare to Desire, and it has a little bit of a financial focus toward later part of the book, but it's really it's actually a blend of fiction and self-help, which typically people don't do. It's usually one or the other, but I just decided to blend them. So it follows a character, her name's Kelly, and it's sort of her journey from fear to freedom in all different ways and shapes and form. And so her journey of personal transformation and how she came to become a very independent woman. And along with each chapter, things that she's going through, there's practical self-help stuff that goes along with it so that the reader can apply in their lives. So that's kind of the idea behind it. It's really about motivating and inspiring people to think bigger about their lives and what freedom means to them. And so it's on Amazon at the moment. People can just look it up and go there, Dare to Desire, and see if they want to get a copy.
Fantastic. And I'll point our whole list over to it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Carrie as much as I did. She shares a lot of great insights and strategies that women can employ to become more empowered when it comes to matters of money, personal finance, and retirement. To learn more about Carrie, go to her website at carriebradley.com. I've also put the link to the site in the description of this episode. She shares a lot of great resources on her website, as well as lays out how you can go about working with her if that's something that you'd like to do. I also encourage you to check out her book, Dare to Desire. Simply go to Amazon and search Carrie Bradley. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.